Good day, everyone. We're going to talk about Chapter 6 Global Gender Issues, and it consists of three topics. First, we're going to talk human rights. Learning objectives. At the end of the lesson, the students should know the different ways that women are harmed and learn what constitute a violation against a woman's right. Human rights. What comes in your mind when you hear human rights? Because I couldn't ask you personally, so I asked my close friends what comes in their mind when they hear human rights. And they have common answer, justice or respect. So what really human rights is? Human rights is a term that is used and abused nowadays. It is also a term that is employed to defend human freedom as well as destroy it. Most often, human rights are seriously violated with women and indigenous people being the subject worldwide. Human rights kay fundamental siya, it's because it gives fairness and equality in human society. If wala ang human rights daw, kay mobalik daw siya sa ancient times in terms sa morality, kay ang human rights manggod is part siya sa human history. But the entitlement of enjoyment of those rights was often limited sa mga men after sa World War II. Example ani ang gender discrimination na ay isa ka employee or aplikante nga gina-consider nga mas less favorable kaysa the other employer or aplikante kay sa iyang sex gender. Next is forms of violence against women's rights. All forms of violence against women deny of their fundamental rights and freedoms in terms of their opinion, equality, and justice before the law, mobility to have access information and education, to work to be employed, and many more. Ang violence against women kay hang klase, ang first nato nga itakal is ang domestic violence. Domestic violence. This form of violence occurs when one person tries to assess power over their partner. It can be emotional, financial, physical, or sexual abuse. The major types of abuse committed against women experiencing domestic violence are: first is physical abuse. This is perceivable type of abuse. It may result in physical injury or some cases can be life-threatening. Example sa physical abuse ay naay mag-uyab. Bunya ang lalaki is eskwela siya sa isa ka sikat nga eskwelahan. Syempre pag sikat nga eskwelahan, so dapat mag-careful jud ka sa imong kuanon kay sikat man nga eskwelahan imong eskwelahan. So ang lalaki yang ginakulata ang iyang ex-girlfriend sa walay rason nga kuan unya ex na biya siya. So unya kay naa may nabalita nga yang ginabuhat na ato sa bae unya na abot pod na siya sa taas, so nagkuan ang eskwelahan nga ipa-expelled siya. Next is emotional psychological abuse. This is the most common type of violence experienced by women and children and is deemed by many as the worst kind of abuse. This type of abuse is more on life-threatening, controlled, and also forcing unwanted sexual acts. Because of that abuse, na ay tendency nga magka-develop ang isa ka tao nga gi-abuse of depression or uban pang klase nga sakit nga naka-incline sa emotional or psychological. Okay, next is financial economic abuse. This is a form of domestic violence in which the abuser uses money to control his partner. It is also constructed to isolate a woman into a state of complete financial dependence. This type of abuse is more commonly sa mga tao nga galisod, like walang-wala gyud. If ever nga naa is napadulong sab sa iyang partner or iyang partner ang naay trabaho, gina-threatened niya iyang partner by controlling the funds and tungod ana maglisod og gawas ang isa ka tawo nga nakasinati og nga nga violence, laboy na og naa na sila'y mga anak. Next is rape and sexual assault. This type of violence is one of the worst and most heinous forms of assault on a human to another that can be afflicted. It occurs if a woman is forced to participate in a sexual act without her consent. These type of violence are very common. Most of the victims traumatized and suffer from acute stress, anxiety, and intense emotion. Next is prostitution. Most involved in prostitution are poor, abused, and have low self-esteem, which limits her capacity to identify alternative income generation opportunities. This type of violence is the act of engaging in promiscuous sexual relations, especially for the money. Did you know that the Philippines in the list of most prostitute children in the world? We are currently ranked number 4. Next is human trafficking. It is a recruitment, transport, and transfer of a person with or without their consent or knowledge within or across national borders using different forms of coercion including abduction, deception, and fraud. Kasagara gagabiktima sa human trafficking is OFW. Lahi ang gisaad sa ilahang amigo or mga kaila nila nga motrabaho didto, and pag-abot day didto is lahi mao day tong mga dili maayo nga pangbuhaton. Dili pod sa Philippines ay example nitong sa maala-ala mo kaya nga gibahog siya sa iyang mga magulang, ginapugo siya nga buhaton kay hirap sila financially, and maorang way nga nahibalan niya kay naaman sab siya kay ila nga ingana ang ginabuhat. O tungod kay gibuhat to niya, matawag na tong human trafficking. Next is female genital mutilation. It is involved the partial or the total removal of the external female genitalia of a girl for culture other non-therapeutic reasons. It said ganina sa meaning, it is part of the culture sa mga ubang bansa mo na ilang ginabuhat ni. Pero it is a violence against women and also for the children. Next is forced marriage. This type of violence against women takes place when the bride does not want to marry the groom but is forced by the others, usually by their family. Sa ato ang Muslim mo'y kasagara gabuhat ani nga pamaagi, like ibuyan nila sa ilang mga kailang or mga gusto nila nga ipakasal sa ila ang mga anak. Naapil po siya sa violence against women kay syempre kung ikaw nga tao nga di gusto ana nga pakasalan nimo, syempre moagi yung kag depression or maghuna-huna na lang ka o maghikog na lang ka kay di man nimo gusto ang gibuhat sa imo. And lastly is sexual harassment. It occurs when unwanted conduct has the purpose or effect of violating a person's dignity and creating an intimidating, degrading, hostile, humiliating, or offensive environment for the person. It can take the form of actions, gestures, spoken or written words, pictures, or etc. Example ng sexual harassment is na ako'y amiga, before pa ni siya sa COVID, so gasakay siya og jeep na una para madog eskwelahan, and wala siya kabalo. Syempre wala pa ba COVID, so tapad-tapad yun na siya nauna, and wala siya kabalo nga katuyang nataparan nga laki is bastusan man di ay. So kada mukuan ang jeep kay mo irog bitaw siya, like mo idikit niya iyang self sa at akong amiga niya. Akong amiga is murag nakuan siya, na traumatize siya ba kay nganong ingana, murag lain bitaw kaayo. So matawag na siya nga sexual harassment kay iya mangga violate man siya. Mao to man ang pag magsakay siya og jeep kay gina tan-aw na niya kung kinsa iyang gataparon or aha siya angay mo lingkod. And now we're done with the human rights. Now is the second topic, empowering women through movement. Lesson objectives. At the end of this lesson, you should know the pioneered feminist activism in the Philippines. You should also be able to identify some Philippines laws that empower Filipino women. Trinidad Dixon was known as the mother of Biak na Bato. She began her revolutionary activities during the preparation for the Revolution of 1896 by procuring arms in various raids. Next is Hilaria Aguinaldo. Hilaria Aguinaldo was the wife of General Emilio Aguinaldo, who founded the Asociación de Damas de Cruz Roja, Women's Red Cross Association, in 1899. It is an organization which coordinated the humanitarian work of the women. Constancia Poblete founded the Liga Femina de la Paz, Philippine Women's League for Peace, in 1902. This group was organized to help the Americans in their participation in the pacification drive against the Filipino people. Next is Concepcion Felix de Calderon. She founded the Association Feminist Filipina, or Feminist Association of the Philippines, in 1905. She is the first women's club in the Philippines, was established to promote the social welfare of women and their participation into the public matter. Pura Villanueva Lalaw, who called for women's suffrage in 1906, going around the country to awaken the consciousness of women as equal partners of men in nation building. La Protección de la Infancia or Protection of Infants was founded in 1907, which provides babies with pasteurized milk among the educated mothers on maternal and infant care. This initiative was the La Gota or Drop of Milk project whose officers and members also formed part of the Association Feminista Filipina and later the Philippine Islands Anti-Tuberculosis Society. Next is Gabriela Silang, 1763, the first woman general heroine of Ilocos. She was known as the first woman to lead during Spanish colonization of the Philippines. And next is Teresa Magbuanwa. She was better known as the Visayan Juan of Arc, a Filipino school teacher and military leader from Iloilo. She earned the award of being the only woman to lead combat troops in the Visayas against Spanish and American forces. Agueda Kahabagan is the only woman in the list of general in the Philippines Army who fought in the battlefield against India, the Spanish forces and became known as General Agueda. And next is Delfina Natividad, who was well-known Filipino together with Marcela Agoncillo and her daughter Lorenza, who seamed together the Philippines flag, and also for being the niece of the national hero of the Philippines, Jose Rizal. Georgia de Jesus was known as Aling Oryang, who founded and became the keeper of the documents of the women's chapter of the Katipunans of the Philippines. She is the wife of Gat Andres Bonifacio, the leader of the Katipunan. Laws that empower the Filipino woman. The advancement towards gender equality came about through women's movements, increased numbers of women political representatives, increased numbers of educated women, higher specificity on women's issues instituted under the legislation, and the focused application of those laws. And the next slide is a list of the laws that empower the Filipino woman. And first is Philippine Constitution, Art X11, Women Section number 14. The state shall be protected all working women by providing safe and healthful working conditions, taking into account their maternal functions and such facilities and opportunities that will enhance their welfare and enable them to realize their full potential in the service of the nation. Second is RA 6725 of 1989. It is an act to strengthen the prohibition on discrimination against women concerning terms and conditions of employment. RA 6949 of 1990 is an act to declare March 8 as special working holiday and to be known as National Women's Day. Next is RA 6955 of 1990. It is an act to declare the unlawful way of pairing Filipino women to foreign nationals for marriage on a mail order basis and or other similar practices including the advertisement and publication. RA 7190 of 1992 is an act to uphold women's integration as equal partner of men and in development and nation building. Next is RA 7600 of 1992. It is an act to provide both government and private environment where essential physical, emotional, and psychological needs of mothers and infants immediately after birth are fulfilled through the practice of roaming in and breastfeeding. Next is RA 7688 of 1994. It is an act to give representation to women in Social Security Commission. RA 7877 of 1995. It is an act to declare sexual harassment unlawful in the employment, education, or training environment. Next is RA 7882 of 1995 is an act to provide aid to women, especially those who own small business, in order to fully harness the talents and skills of the female labor force. Next is RA 8353 of 1997. It is an act to reclassify the definition of the crime of rape into a crime against person. RA 8369 of 1997 is an act to establish family courts to have exclusive original jurisdiction over child and family cases. RA 8505 of 1998, Rape Victim Assistance and Protection Act. It is an act to provide protection and assistance for rape victims. A 8972 of 2000, Solo Parents Welfare Act. It is an act to provide benefits and privilege to solo parents and their children. RA 9208 of 2003 Anti-Trafficking into Persons Act. It is an act to institute policies to eliminate human trafficking, especially to women and children. Next is RA 962 Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act. It is an act to declare criminalization of violence against women and their children and protection of women and their children in the context of marital dating or common law relationship, declaration of VAWC as a public crime. Next is RA 10354 of 2002, Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Act. It's an act to provide for national directive on responsible parenthood and reproductive. Lastly is RA 97110 Magna Carta of Women. Women by fulfilling, recognizing, promoting, protecting, and promoting their rights, especially those in the marginalized sectors. And the last topic is Lesson 3 LGBT Rights and Struggles. Lesson objectives. At the end of the lesson, you should know how the LGBT community suffers in the hand of an accepting community. You should also become familiar with the different support groups that help empower the LGBT people amidst the various social challenges they face. Struggles faced by LGBT in the society. First is homophobia. It is referred to the fear or aggression towards gay people, but can also refer to stigma arising from social ideologies about homosexuality. Second is marginalization and social inclusion. It is the core of exclusion from fulfilling and full social lives at individual, interpersonal, societal levels. A. Attempt suicide. B. Being ignored and isolated in the community. C. Dropping out of school. D. Lack of family and social support. E. Leaving home and family. F. Transfer to the other countries for seeking safer livelihood and acceptance. G. Unable to find regular jobs. H. Unable to access various social services. Psychological distress. LGBT people face considerable levels of discrimination, harassment, and stigmatization in their day-to-day life. Many LGBT face stress due to very high level of homophobic, bullying, and verbal attacks. And these are the list of psychological distress. A. Casual homophobic comments. B. Childhood sexual abuse. C. Harassment by neighbors. B. No protection against discrimination at work. E. Physical violence and discrimination. B. Prejudice. Embarrassed response from professionals. G. Rejection by loved ones or religious professionals. H. Verbal harassment. Victims of hate crimes and violence sometimes experience of sexual and physical assault, harassment, and hate crimes. LGBT movements in the Philippines. First is ACOD. It is a gay support group at the Davao Oriental State College of Science and Technology. Second is Alpha Nu. It is the first fraternity in the Philippines for all who identify themselves as men, regardless of sexual orientation. It began in 2014, recognized by the UP Diliman for advocating nonviolent initiations, gender sensitivity, and psychological support. Third is Bistar or Bisayang Dako. It is a Cebu-based organization which recruits gender equality, sponsors and organizes educational forums to various communities to help Filipinos understand gender issues, especially in promoting human rights in the context of HIV or AIDS prevention. Fourth is Equality Philippines. It is a non-profit organization which promotes and safeguard the rights of LGBT members and allies in the Philippines. Fifth is GAHOM. It is a support and advocacy group of gays in Cebu City. Sixth is IWAG. It is a social and support group in Davao City. Seventh is Lundayan ng Sining, Sanctuary of Art. It is a registered lesbian art studio providing a venue for lesbian in Quezon City. Next is Pinoy FTM. IC is the first organization for transsexual and transgender men in the Philippines, founded in July 2011 in Metro Manila. Next is UCAP Maharlika. It is the first LGBT student organization at the University of Southeastern Philippines, established in 2013. Pro-Gay Philippines, or the Progressive Organization of Gays. It is an organization of gay rights in Manila that led the first Pride March in the Philippines in 1994. PUP Cabaro. It is a gender equality activist organization at the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. Rainbow Rights, or Our Rights. It is a non-governmental organization that supports human rights and equal opportunities regardless of gender identity and sexual orientation. True Colors Coalition (TCC). It is a political LGBT organization that promotes struggle, acceptance, and support. UP Babaylan. It is the first LGBT student organization in the Philippines, established in UP Diliman in 1992. Lastly is UPLB Babaylan. It is an LGBT organization and support group of UP Los Baños which promotes gender equality among the student body. And that's it for Chapter 6 Global Gender Issues.